Giant sequoia trees, rushing waterfalls, mountain caves, massive canyons, and maybe most importantly, fewer crowds. It's something that's tough to come by in the national parks these days, but in this place, you won't see nearly as many people. So join me as I guide you through some of its top places, and to what just might be its best view. This is Kings Canyon National Park. Welcome to Dan Treks. And first things first, you're probably wondering about that drone shot in the beginning, since drones are definitely not allowed in national parks. I can assure you though, I wasn't breaking any rules, and in just a bit, I'll tell you how and even where to find that view. For now though, let's dive into Kings Canyon. America's national parks are pretty popular, and crowds in the busy seasons can make for a less than enjoyable experience. But you probably won't have to worry about that if you decide to visit Kings Canyon. Only an hour from the city of Fresno and its airport, it's relatively easy to get to as well. And while it does share a border with the extremely busy Sequoia National Park, you're only going to see a fraction of the visitors that its neighbor does. Kings Canyon is known for its sequoias too, and that brings us to our first stop. If you're coming in from Fresno, keep an eye out just past the park entrance for the big stump grove. If you're hoping to see some giant sequoias on this relatively easy 1.6 mile long hike, well, there's actually a pretty amazing one just past the parking lot where the trail starts. Unfortunately, there's a reason that this grove is called Big Stump. Most of the giant sequoias here were actually cut down at the turn of the 20th century. Ironically enough, sequoia wood is soft, brittle, and kind of worthless. Not a single company who logged sequoias here ever actually ended up turning a profit. Heading down into the grove, you'll pass several massive sequoia stumps before reaching the Big Stump Meadow, which is home to even more remnants of fallen sequoias. You'll also pass a sequoia that was cut down that actually shattered upon impact with the ground, known as the shattered giant. When they fell, the massive trees would literally explode upon impact, and much of the wood would be unusable. To counter this, loggers would make a feather bed of branches and leaves to soften the impact, and you can actually check one of these out a little further down the trail. One of the main attractions here is the Mark Twain stump, the remnants of a sequoia that was cut down in 1891. The tree itself was shipped to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Today, there's a staircase to reach the top of the stump, so visitors can fully appreciate just how massive this tree was. Honestly, while interesting, this whole trail is a little bit depressing. Thankfully, the logging of giant sequoias was outlawed in the early 1900s. So if you want to see some standing sequoias as opposed to lifeless dead stumps, head just up the road to what is definitely going to be the busiest spot in the entire park. This is Grant Grove Village. It's pretty much the main hub of Kings Canyon National Park. Here you'll find the visitor center, a full-service restaurant, market, and even post office. It's also where the park's main hotel is, the John Muir Lodge. You can choose a modest room in the main building, or from the handful of cabins just down the hill. If you prefer the cheaper option, which I usually do, there's 3 different campgrounds in the Grant Grove area: Azalea, Sunset, and Crystal Springs. All 3 require advanced reservations made online. But let's get back to the sequoias. The ones still standing, that is. This is Grant Grove itself. Easily the most popular part of the entire park, and home to the second largest tree in the entire world, the General Grant tree. Find the trail to it down the road just past the visitor center. This 0.7 mile long loop trail takes you past some pretty impressive giant sequoias, including a downed one called the Fallen Monarch, that you can actually walk through. There's also Gamlin's Cabin, built in 1872 by a pair of aspiring timbermen. The main attraction here is the tree itself. Named after Union General and later President Ulysses S. Grant, it stands 267 feet tall and 29 feet wide, and also has the honor of being the nation's Christmas tree. It's impressive, but this is where you're going to see the most crowds. Not only at this grove, but at this very tree. And if you're a little antisocial like me, you probably want to get away from all of these people, right? There's actually another grove of sequoias literally just down the road that sees far fewer visitors. So, continue down the road, past the twin sequoia trees on your left, where you'll find a small parking lot and gate signaling the start of the North Grove Trail. This 1.7 mile long loop trail descends deeper into the forest and allows hikers a much quieter and closer experience with these amazing big trees. There's actually a few more pretty amazing sequoia groves in Kings Canyon. Unfortunately, quite a few were almost completely destroyed in the 2020 Castle Fire and the 2021 KNP Complex Fire. For those of you that have watched my Sequoia National Park video, linked above, you know that these big trees are relatively fire resistant. So it's pretty shocking that entire groves are burning down. In fact, since 2020 alone, nearly 20% of the giant sequoia population has been destroyed by these extreme wildfires. It's pretty alarming, and it's why I'm actually working on a documentary titled Big Trees, exploring the history of past, present, and future threats to the sequoias, to tell their story, help raise awareness, and just maybe help save these amazing trees. Check out the link in the description below for the official website, concept film, and GoFundMe page. Alright, enough self-promotion, back to Kings Canyon. That wasn't always the name of this place, though. It used to be called General Grant National Park, and only encompassed this small area where the sequoia groves are located. The much larger and more diverse eastern section wasn't added until 1940, and then renamed to Kings Canyon National Park. There was actually a protracted conflict between environmentalists and the city of Los Angeles, who filed claims to dam the Kings River and flood the canyon, creating reservoirs and producing hydroelectric power for the city. But preservation prevailed, and if you want an impressive view of the park's namesake, head back up from the General Grant tree and across the street, passing the John Muir Lodge for our next stop at Panoramic Point. Generally only open in the late spring, summer, and early fall, this road leads you to a parking lot for the short, half-mile round-trip trail to the point. You get an absolutely stunning view of the Sierra Nevada mountains, Hume Lake, and into Kings Canyon itself. But we're still in the busy section up here, so it's time to leave the crowds behind and make the drive into the canyon itself. Take Highway 180 past the Grant Tree turnoff, following signs for Cedar Grove. It's also important to mention, this road is generally closed from November until the last week in April, so you'll want to plan your visit accordingly. It takes about an hour to drive from the top to the bottom of Kings Canyon and down to Cedar Grove. This road is pretty steep, so low gear on your vehicle is a must. So, about all of these drone shots. The area that the highway takes you through, between the upper and lower parts of Kings Canyon, is actually National Forest land. Sequoia National Forest, to be exact. where as long as you're outside of designated wilderness and there's no temporary restrictions in place, drone flights are perfectly legal. There's also some pretty cool places to explore here too, like the Chicago stump, the remnants of a massive sequoia that was cut down in 1892 and sent to Chicago for the World's Columbian Exposition. Or the stump meadow of Converse Basin, a grove that was heavily logged in the late 1800s. And then there's the BOOLE tree, a huge sequoia that holds the title of 6th largest tree in the entire world. Look for a video from me on these in the future. But if you can't wait, my written guides to them are in the description below. But back to the drive to the bottom of Kings Canyon. The views on the way down are amazing. And there's plenty of pull-offs along the way to stop for pictures. Once at the bottom, the first place you're going to want to stop at is a pretty easy one to reach: GRIZZLY Falls. Keep an eye out for the signs pointing to the GRIZZLY Falls picnic area on the left. From the small parking lot, it's maybe a 2-minute walk to the base of the waterfall itself. Most impressive in the spring, by late summer, there's a pretty good chance that GRIZZLY Falls could be completely dry. Don't worry though, there's even more waterfalls waiting for you just a little bit deeper into the park. Now that you're down in the canyon, you may have been wondering, can you go inside the mountains? Alright, there was probably nobody wondering that. Well, regardless of whether you were wondering it or not, you're going to pass a large parking lot on your right for Boyden Cavern, where you can, in fact, go inside some of these mountains. The cave is only accessible by a guided tour, costing around $18 per person. While it's possible to get walk-up tickets, I'd recommend booking ahead of time online. Link in the description below. There's no service down here either, so make sure you have a copy of your tickets saved to your phone. Tours last about an hour, taking you to some of the most impressive formations inside, while also telling the cave's story. Apparently, a logger who worked up closer to Grant Grove called this place home in the early 1900s. I guess it beats being homeless. At the tour's conclusion, you have the option to leave from the way you came in, or take the wild cave exit, which has you walking through an extremely shallow stream and through some tight spaces before popping out just beneath the regular exit. It's a cool way to end the tour if you're up for it. If you go this way, it's best to bring some waterproof shoes or hiking sandals though. Your feet are bound to get wet. Now that we're done going under the mountains, it's time to venture into the heart of Kings Canyon itself. Cedar Grove. The green-blue glacial water of the Kings River follows the road for most of the way. And while it may look tempting to swim in, especially since it's usually quite a bit hotter down here at the bottom of the canyon, looks can be deceiving. The current is extremely strong and very dangerous. Probably best to pass on taking a dip in this river. Here at Cedar Grove, you'll find a visitor center, 4 campgrounds, and even a small lodge with a market. For this trip, we decided to get a spot in Moraine Campground. And we had no trouble getting a site last minute. This is kind of what I mean by solitude down here. I only counted a handful of other tents. Granted, this was early September. Do as I say and not as I do though. Probably best not to wait until the 11th hour just in case. And since I filmed this, they don't allow walk-up reservations anymore. It all has to be done in advance online at recreation.gov. We were tired and it was dinner time. But tomorrow, there were a few short trails down here that we wanted to check out before heading to what I consider to be one of the best views in all of Kings Canyon. So you wake up and find yourself with a whole day down here in Cedar Grove at the bottom of Kings Canyon. What do? The road down here isn't very long, and there's only a handful of short hikes before you reach the road's end, where backpackers generally park to start long treks into the backcountry. We'll get there soon enough. For now though, it's best to take in the views of the mountains down here. There's a reason Kings Canyon is often described as a mini Yosemite. But our next stop comes up pretty quick on your right. Roaring River Falls. This extremely short trail is 0.3 miles round trip and takes you through the woods to a relatively small but powerful waterfall. Coming from a tributary of the Kings River, Roaring River Falls is an example of just how strong the current is down here. You probably won't spend that long here. And what is arguably the most popular hike in the Cedar Grove area is just up ahead. ZUMWALT Meadow. Look for signs marking the meadow and then pull off in the parking lot to begin. The trail, or what's currently open of it, is about 1.5 miles round trip. I say what's currently open because the boardwalk section of this hike has been out for about 4 years now and still hasn't been repaired, unfortunately. Normally, the trail is a complete loop around the meadow. Hopefully the boardwalk is fixed soon, but for now, start the trail and take the bridge across the river, through the woods, and across a rocky moraine, which then pops you out at an amazing view of the meadow itself, with North and Grand Sentinel domes towering up above it. You can continue on for a bit, but you'll have to backtrack out since the loop is closed. Maybe by the time that you do this hike, the boardwalk will have finally been repaired. But I'm always trying to find the best view, and this spot definitely gets my vote for Kings Canyon. And that view is of Paradise Valley via the Mist Falls Trail. This hike is about 9 miles round trip, but I would say that about 7.5 miles of it is relatively level, with only about 870 feet of elevation gain, most of that coming at the very end. I do recommend an early start, especially because the first mile or so is completely exposed, and temperatures can get pretty hot down here in the summer. Find the trail at the road's end parking lot, just next to the ranger station. If you're doing this as a day hike, then there's no need to have a permit. But if you plan on backpacking and camping out for the night in the backcountry, then you will need to go ahead and get one. If you do choose to hike in the early morning, be a little more cautious and keep an eye out for wildlife, namely black bears. So maybe make a little extra noise on the trail, and if you do spot one, give them at least 100 yards of space. The trail is pretty sandy to start out, which can make hiking it maybe a little more difficult than usual. But you're treated to some amazing views of the granite mountains of Kings Canyon on either side of you, as well as the rushing waters of the South Fork of the Kings River on your right. The trail eventually descends into some pretty dense forest, which is a great opportunity to cool off a little bit. 9 miles might sound like a lot, but we quickly realized that we were absolutely flying through this hike. It really is mostly flat up until the very last part. Keep following the signs for Mist Falls, and eventually the trail will begin to turn and put you right alongside the river. From here, it starts to ascend up the rocks. Keep heading up, and maybe look behind you once in a while. You'll notice a familiar view becoming more and more visible. You've officially entered Paradise Valley. Eventually, you'll reach a large, relatively flat slab of granite that's a perfect stop to turn around and take in the view. It's a pretty famous shot, and it's easy to see why. Just a little further up, and you'll reach the trail's namesake, Mist Falls. If you can find some shade, it's a great spot to take a break. The trail continues on through Paradise Valley for a long time. It's a route that a lot of backpackers take into the amazing backcountry of Kings Canyon. But since we were doing this as a day hike, it was time to turn around and head back. And that was about it for our Kings Canyon adventure. If you haven't visited its sister park yet, then do yourself a favor and head over to Sequoia National Park. It's spectacular. Countless groves of giant sequoias, mountain views, and the largest living thing on Earth. Check out my video guide on it to see some of these sights and even more.